Hello again from the Canadian North. While building the model, I felt the need and the pleasure to read more, to learn, to document myself about the subject of my model, about the history of that period, and about the very story of the ship itself. So I got sucked up in the larger subject of Russian history of the time. As I explained in a past episode, the Russian history is a tragic one, but also it makes for a nice story, especially when looked at from afar. So every now and then, while building Russian model ships, I might delve in the subject for your pleasure or exasperation. I have to say from the very beginning that I am biased against Russia. During the last 150 years, almost all the bad things that happened to my country originated from Russia. This is a vast subject to be talked about with other occasions. And I left my country and came to live in Canada, but the multi-generation trauma and the sad things that happened in my country because of the Russians, those I cannot forgive, not forget. I am biased against Russia. In 1877 it occupied a large Romanian province and it never gave it back. In 1917 the Romanian state treasure went to Petersburg as to be protected against the Germans in World War I, and the said treasure never came back. In 1945 Russia imposed on us a diabolical social system, the communism. I should say as diabolical, methodically criminal, and terminally unnatural as the Nazism. Ask almost anybody with a minimum knowledge of history in Eastern Europe, and you'll find out that Russia is the big bad bully of that part of the world. So yes, I am biased against Russia. Now let's go to the latest disaster that Russia is creating in Eastern Europe with their ongoing Ukrainian war. And in this context, by Russia, I understand the nationalist elites and the Kremlin mafia, also known as the Russian government. First, let's clarify some points here. First point, who are the Ukrainians and why Russia says they don't exist? If we look at a map with the growth of the Russian Empire during various centuries, we can see the original Russia around 1550, let's say, and only Kharkov today in Ukraine was part of the Russia. That very small northeast corner of today Ukraine belonged indeed to Russia, and it was populated by Russians. Ukraine came in the empire quite late, in 1793 to be more precise. Before that, Ukraine and Belarus they were part of another state. That state was called Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was a union, a medieval union between Poland and Lithuania. Lithuania was having a lot of Belarusia, and Poland had a lot from Ukraine. At that point, there were basically no Russians living in Ukraine. But the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was destroyed in 1793. So Ukraine and Belarusia, they came to be conquered by Russia. And this is how Russia got those territories and the populations that were living there, which were not Russians. Ukrainians were originally Slavic people, Slavic communities related with Poles and related with Lithuanians. There was no Russian factor involved in that between 1793. When the Russians come in Ukraine, they do change things. Ukraine was by now populated by, as I said, by Ukrainians. They like to call themselves Ruthenians. They were related to the Poles, but there were also Tataric populations and Cossack populations, Cossack tribes. And some of these people welcomed the Russians. The Russians took advantage of this, and while taking over Ukraine, they changed in time. They changed the religion. They imposed the Orthodox Christian Orthodox religion. They changed their taxes. They even changed their language. The Ukrainian original language, the Slavic, the Poles dialects were banned, and they had to start speaking Russian. So every time that the Russians conquer the territory, and you can see from this map how many territories were not originally Russians, when they conquer a new territory, they impose their own style. And the key of the problem is that the Russian style is always, without exception, backward, corrupt, and violent. This is why basically nobody else wants to live with Russia, Ukrainians included. So this is why every time during following centuries, when they had a chance to get separated from Russia, to get some kind of independence from Moscow, Ukrainians took advantage of these occasions. This is what happened at the end of World War I, at the end of the Great War, when the Russian Empire fell. The communists, the Bolsheviks, were not yet very strong, and Ukraine proclaimed its own independence, and that Ukrainian state during 1918-1920 was a part of, let's say, whatever was left from in Europe after the Great War. It was an independent entity. So the same happened during World War II when Hitler invaded. It pushed back the Bolshevik domination in Ukraine. Almost the whole of Ukraine was conquered by Germans, but the Ukrainians started to build under German occupation their own state again, their own institutions again, and their own nationalist movement. They created their own literature, their own poetry, their own nationalist elites, and they wanted to separate themselves from Russia. Of course, Russia came back with the Bolsheviks and everything, and when it came back, it created a lot of chaos in Ukraine and a lot of suffering, and the Ukrainians had to stay with the Soviet Union until 1990, when the communism fell. Then they started again to create their own state, their independent state. It didn't go very well for the first 15 years, for more than 15 years actually, until about 2014. 2014, like 10 years ago, Ukrainians revolted against their own elites, their own president, that was seen following too closely the orders from Moscow, and they manifested and they said, okay, we want to be with Poland, we want to be Europeans now, we had enough of backwardness and corruption coming from Russia. And well, the conflict between them started to be more aggravated after 2014. Of course, Russia occupied Crimea, and the rest is quite known. But this story of an independent Ukraine has to be told all over and over again, because they are two separate peoples. They are two separate national identities, the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, they do exist no matter what lies Kremlin tells everybody else. Now there is another point. There is an equivalence that Russian elites and a good part of the right wing of a political spectrum here in North America, even in Europe, like to push, like to peddle. It's an equivalence between Russia and the United States. And the story goes like this, the argument goes like this. Look, Ukraine is in Russia's backyard, and at some point Ukraine wanted to get more independence and to join Europe and to join NATO, which are perceived as Russia's enemy. Imagine what would happen if someday Mexico, which is in United States backyard, would like to join China or to sign a military treaty with China. Of course, United States would make war on Mexico, would invade Mexico. So, yeah, the Russia is entitled to invade Ukraine, because Ukraine got to be the enemy. Well, the argument is false, and it's full of lies. Russia and United States are very different in so many points. But one point, viewed from outside, is that the United States is a go-to state. Outside populations, Latin Americans, Mexicans, whomever, they want in. They want to be with the Americans, they want to live in America. This is why you have 2 million of Mexicans and Latin Americans coming illegally to United States every year for many years now. 2 million per year, each year. United States is a go-to destination, while Russian state, Russian empire, it's an escape from type of entity. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to live with the Russians. Nobody wants to be with the Russians, except the Russians themselves. This is why you have the eastern districts of Ukraine. We are chock full of Russians. They are populated by Russian ethnics. They want to be with Russia. And that's quite okay, if you ask me. But Russia doesn't want only those two districts. Of course, Russia wants the whole Ukraine to be destroyed and occupied. So this is why each time there is a chance to escape from Russia, those nations, those entities, they take it. They manifest themselves. This is why Kazakhstan got away from Russia, and Ukraine and the Baltic countries. Their first acts when they could be free, they took that chance to be free and not to be with Russia. Again, a lot of people want to live in the States, in the United States, but nobody you see immigrating to Russia. Now, this is a big difference. You cannot make analogies like this, because what matters in the end is what people want. So when you see people leaving Russia and taking a chance to build independent states outside of Russia, and when you see other people mass migrating to United States, you cannot make that argument that somehow Russia is entitled to destroy Ukraine because United States would do the same with Mexico. The Mexicans want to live in America. Nobody wants to live with the Russians. Period.